In this video, I will go over 20 different middle game patterns to try and teach you all of the most essential things you definitely need to know about the middle game. The benefit from watching this video is that you will be able to determine in each position that you have during your games what the best middle game plan will be. You should also watch my video on pawn structures because this video in particular we are going to talk about optimizing your pieces, but knowing how to use the different pawn structures is also very important. So this is our first position, and this is a very basic and also very common opening position. But we are going to be talking about the middle game. And the first thing we are going to be talking about is the use of open files and semi-open files. Or in other words, how can you activate your rooks so they can also participate in the game. So in this position it is white to move. And we are going to play bishop to e3. While I think most of you would maybe be thinking about castling or even playing something else, or maybe bishop to g5, we will play bishop to e3. And why do we do this? Because I want to demonstrate that we can on purpose create open files. So let's say that black captures us, we can capture back. And okay, we have doubled pawns, but it doesn't matter because this pawn is actually supporting the center, so everything is still fine. But we also have this file. And that is what we are trying to do here. We are deliberately trying to open up a file so that we can use it to attack. So here we are both going to castle, and now we have a rook on this f file. And this is just to show you that you can create certain patterns in your own games by forcing them as well, even if you don't see any patterns. And especially for activating your rooks, that is important. But what is the benefit now from the fact that we have our rook here on this f file? Well, that's going to become clear in a moment. I'm going to play through a game. So black plays bishop to g4, and black is basically trying to attack our knight. But what we are trying to do as white is we are trying to use our benefit. And the only benefit that we really have with this position is the fact that we can attack this f7 pawn with our bishop and with our rook. The second thing we have to our benefit is actually that we could also potentially push here and create some strong center. But we are going to maybe use that later. Our main focus is to activate this rook. So whatever we do, we're always going to be thinking about our rook and our attack on f7. So black is attacking us. What are we going to do? Do we care about this knight? Not really. We are actually going to attack with h3, and we are hoping that black exchanges because this bishop can, in some variations, be a defender of this f7 pawn. If that's the case, we can always use our knight as well, but if they exchange, it's not really a problem, and this even helps us because now we have the queen, the rook, and the bishop already aiming at this square. So our attack is building up a little bit. Black plays pawn to a6 because they are trying to launch an attack on the queen side, but we are very much focused on how we can use this open file. So we already have a rook and a queen here. What else can we do? Well, there are actually two plans that you could potentially use here. One of them is to play your knight to d5, which we are going to continue with because it's the most solid move as well. One other plan would actually be to play your pawn to g4. That would also make sense. And even though a move like this looks completely crazy, it completely fits with our middle game plan. We want to have as much pressure as we possibly can on this file. And of course, if that means that we can kick away this knight with a pawn, that would be a good thing. But of course, I mean, black can play pawn to h6, then probably we have to play pawn to g4 and start an attack like this as well. But I am going to continue with the most simple of lines first, and that is playing the knight to d5. We will take a look at these g pawn and h pawn moves just in a moment and our next examples. So black has a lot of options. Let's say they trade. Now we have this position. Of course, we don't want to take with the pawn because otherwise we would be locking in our own bishop. We want to take with the bishop so that we can aim at this square. And right now we already have quite some pressure here. We already have 3 pieces aiming at this. So black plays queen d7, trying to protect. And now the question again becomes, how can we use this open file? And that is the only question we will be asking. And if you have a clear pattern in your mind, for example, here we are using this open file to attack, it's pretty easy to find the best move. Because here the best move is of course just rook to f2, because we want to double up the rooks and put more pressure on this f7 pawn. Let's say black plays here, knight to b4. And of course we also have to think about black, because if we just move the rook, well, black will be exchanging this, and we will be losing one of our key attackers. That was also the piece that was preventing this pawn from potentially moving. So we want to make sure we keep our bishop safe. Sometimes you can do trades. As we have seen, we didn't really care here on the other side of the board about the trades going on and us losing the knight. But we really do care about the fact that we want to keep this bishop alive. Black is still trying to attack it, but we are just going to continue here. Black continues, and if you put enough pressure like this, eventually something is going to break, because we clearly have a plan. We are clearly attacking with 4 pieces already, and black only has, well, 3 defenders. So you know that black is short a defender, and that means we will be able to play for some tactics. And this position we can take, we can do a bunch of trades, we get an endgame like this, and this is a winning endgame for white. And that is where I will end off this first example, which really shows us how we can use the open file that we tried to create ourselves in the opening. Now here we have a second example. We play bishop to e3, but our opponent doesn't care. They don't want to take us, they just play the bishop to b6. So we were not successful in opening up our files. That's fine. We're just going to continue with queen to d2, and that also gives us the flexible option that we can castle on both sides of the board. And black plays h6. And this is already a very interesting moment, because this pawn is what I call an anchor point. This is a target for attack, and if we can start pushing our own pawns on the king side and we can attack this pawn on h6, we are for sure going to be able to create open files or weaknesses. So what are we going to do here? We will castle queen side, and black will probably castle king side, and then we are going to try to launch a big attack at the enemy king. And this is one of the other ways that we can force to create open files. And just by keeping this idea of open files in mind, you will be able to find many plans like this in your own games as well. So we play pawn h3, and why do we do this? Well, because we have the simple plan that we want to play g4, g5, and we want to start opening up the position. Let's say bishop to e6, which makes a lot of sense, of course, because black already senses that something is coming and they want to exchange pieces and also attack us on the queen side. But we are just going to continue. Why? Again, the bishop here for us doesn't matter too much. So let's say they take, everything is fine. We get this position, black plays queen e7, and we just want to continue with our attack. That is the entire goal here. And since we are attacking both the pawn and the knight, black will have to do something, and we will for sure be able to create open files. For example, here they play g takes g5, h takes g5, I mean, and we already have, of course, 3 pieces that can potentially recapture, plus you can already see that suddenly we will be able to open up the rook here. The best thing here is to play a defensive move first. Doesn't really matter for the sake of our concept here. And then at some point we are going to attack, we are going to capture this, and we are also going to start using our open file. And you can already see that the plans for white are pretty easy to find and are pretty clear in this position. We just want to start pushing this h-pawn and open up a second open file as well for this rook. So black is trying to defend, maybe trade off some pieces if they can, which makes sense if you are defending. If you can remove some attackers, that will sometimes relieve the pressure, but it won't be enough. And here we can even play a move like rook h2, and as you can see, we now have the double option that we can double up both on the g file or the h file. We have basically 2 possibilities here. And in any case, this will always be a really pleasant position for white, because we are always going to be the one attacking. At some point we can push h6, and probably some type of checkmate will also follow in the next 10 to 15 moves. So this is how you can also force the creation of open files. We have one more example. This is a bit similar here, but now black has a different pawn structure. So this very much looks like what we have seen, but black now has this pawn structure here instead of the pawn on h6. And I just want to show you that it's the same example, but now our anchor point has changed. In the past example, h6 was our anchor point, the piece that we wanted to attack, but here that is g6, because if you can attack this with a pawn, we will be able to create open files. So here white is playing bishop to g4, and we can play queen to h6. And of course we are ignoring the threat on the knight, because taking this would be a pleasure for white, because we can recapture. This pawn is actually helping us as well, and that's just the basic thing that we wanted. We wanted to have some opportunities of attacking on the g and the h file. Let's say black plays queen to e7, and we are going to continue with the attack, h5, and you can already see how we are going to force the opening of the open files. If I just play any move for black, it's going to be big trouble, because of course we can take here, We can go in with the knight. We already have a queen and a rook lined up. We can even double up, so everything will collapse for black. Black can also try to defend, for example, bishop takes h5, but this is just incredible. Everything wins basically for white. You can even sacrifice the rook. You can go in with the knight. That's the example I'm going to show. You can go in with the knight as well. Now we have double pressure, and some lines we can attack the bishop with g4 just because we want it to move so that we can start attacking. And the specific variation here doesn't matter too much, but you can see how all of these tactics possibly become possible. And we will have a checkmate in this position. It is a checkmate in 3 moves, and then this will be our checkmate. So this just to show you that you can actually focus on your rooks, which is a thing that many players don't do, but you can focus on your rooks and force them to become active participators in your attack. One other way you can do this is, for example, a position like this, and it's most of the time when we have some exchanges going on, that pawn moves, and the pawns will move from one file to the other, and we have to make the right decision, which file are we gonna open up. And this is one of those examples. So here we have 2 options. We can take with basically we have 3 options, but you could say we can take with the c pawn, we can take with the e pawn, or we can take with the queen. So what is the best one? Well, you just have to always think, what is the benefit from each move? If we take this, we have an open file, literally an open file. There are no pawns on this file, which can be interesting since we also have the rook on this file. But black can always just challenge us. We will have some trades, and maybe black might even be the one getting this open file. You could also say, well, I'm gonna take with my queen, but that doesn't really help activate our rooks in any way either. And okay, I mean, we are attacking this, but black can play something like queen c7 and everything is well defended. Even if we do a little trade here, nothing really matters. So the right approach here is to play e takes d5 and create a semi-open or half-open file, which is what we have seen before. Those are the files where we are attacking something with our rook. If there is nothing in our way, it's called an open file. If there is still a pawn there, it's called a semi-open file. But the basic idea remains the same. We want to start attacking, and sometimes it's even better for us if there is still a pawn here, because at least we have some target for attack. We have an anchor point again to attack, and this time it is going to be the e7 pawn. So this variation, a couple of things can happen. We can do some trades, but eventually we will be able to build up the pressure on this pawn. We can even do the triple stack move, stacking both rooks and the queen, all to attack this pawn. The thing is, at some point, black might think, well, I'm just going to push it. That solves some of my problems. But usually when they do that, they will create new problems. For example, here we exchange, and now again, both of these pawns are actually not that well protected. And we even have this variation where we can win a pawn with the queen. All of this to show you that you should really think every time you are moving a pawn from one file to the other, because you are doing some exchange, you are going to create or close files. And you have to always think, is this in my benefit or not? And if you have multiple choices, you have to pick the one that's best for your rooks and queen. Otherwise, you will be limiting your own attacking chances. Now we are going to focus on how we can optimize our knight. And we are going to do this with what is known as an outpost. And that's basically a square that we can place our knight where it can't easily be challenged. And because of that square where it's supported, it is influencing a lot of squares into the enemy position. So you can probably already imagine what I'm talking about. We are talking about a square like this. For example, if I can put the knight on d5, that would be quite amazing. Maybe even if I could put a knight here, that would be quite good, but it wouldn't be protected right there. So I would have to find a solution for that. You could also think about placing the knight here as well, but it's going to be a little bit of a longer route to get there. We are going to need a bunch of moves, and black can also prevent us from going there. So let's just start off by playing knight to d5, which is of course a good move. And black has to move the bishop and give us a check. And the good thing is we have our knight on this square, it's protected. So that means first of all the rooks can't really do anything. Plus we also are attacking all of these squares into the enemy camp, which has a lot of influence. You might be thinking, well, I mean, black can just challenge your knight, so that's not really a good square for the knight. But in this case it actually is a good square because there are some tricks. Knight c7, knight e6, and suddenly you can see that everything will collapse and we are going to win material because we have our knight on this legendary e6 square that we in the beginning already targeted as a good potential square to place our knight. So that is why here knight e5 is very strong. And you have to try and find squares like this for your knight, and even if it takes a couple of moves. Let's say that there was already a pawn on c6. I wouldn't mind if I had to play a 3-move maneuver just to get my knight to a decent square. Or let's say my knight was here, I wouldn't care if I had to make 5 moves if I have to reach this square, because my knight was just not really doing that much here, and it's way more influential here. And I'm just going to show you one sample line, for example this, because white is trying to play c6. And now they are protecting the c7 square with the rook so that we don't have any of our tricks. But the thing is, once you get your knight on the outpost square, of course you want to keep it there for as long as you can. So we want to prevent black from playing c6, or at least we want to make sure that if they play this, they're also creating some new complications for themselves. So here we can play pawn to b4, force the bishop to move, play pawn to b5, of course, because we want to have control over the c6 square. So that if black plays this, which they can still try, at least we can exchange, and then we can move our knight. And now you are suddenly going to see that this is our entire goal. We place the knight on the outpost square because it has a lot of influence and it forces black to do something about it. But sometimes trying to chase away our knight will force our opponent to also create new problems. And suddenly there are problems. Well, you can already see these pawns are very weak, and we are just going to remaneuver with the knight, and we are going to try and find a new home. And you can see we already have two very good options, f5 and c4, but I think of course c4 is probably, let's say we exchange, c4 is probably a better option, because here we literally can never be attacked by an enemy pawn, and that is one of the most amazing squares in general for a knight. Because, well, if we go here, we have the benefit that the bishop has to move, but yeah, on the next move, most likely somewhere we're gonna get attacked and we will have to move our knight again. So, of course, a square like c4 is the better choice. It's not only knights that benefits from outposts, but also other pieces. So this is another really nice example. If I ask you, what would you play here for white? There are actually a bunch of good moves, but it's interesting to think about what specifically you would play. And I think many players would play knight to g6, which is a very good move. I'm not going to complain about this, because of course this is an outpost. We are placing our knight here. It's actually protected twice. It can't be attacked by another pawn. It's attacking the rook. Everything seems fine. But the thing is, you can also place your rook here, and placing rooks like this on the file protected like by a pawn is also very important. Especially because we also have the option of recapturing with the knight. And this comes already with the threat here on this pawn. And if black is not careful, we are just going to double up, and then we are just going to have double rooks on the open file. And that's going to be quite amazing. So basically black is forced to exchange. And we can do multiple things, but here the best thing is not even to take with the knight, it is to take with this pawn. Because we basically create a new hole here that we can use. We can place our knight here, and also we now have a semi-open file for the rook, but that's good because at least we have a target for attack. So the game might go something like this. For example, rook to g8, knight to f5, black has to defend this pawn, we can play g7, everything is going to collapse. Let's say they take with the bishop, we play rook g1, and this is already game over because black can't do anything. So it's good if you have an outpost to also think, well, maybe it's not even best to put my knight there. Maybe my rook might also be well placed on that square. And even bishops can use outposts. So this is going to be an example of that. So if we take a look at this position, material is basically equal except for the fact that we have the bishop and black has the knight. We are going to talk a lot about those positions at the end of this video as well. But here the thing is, what would the ideal square be for the bishop? If we imagine we can move the bishop anywhere on the board, it can jump over pieces, it can move to any square, where would I put it? Well, I would personally put my bishop here on c6, because then it would be, well, in the enemy camp, taking away squares, protecting my pawns as well, and basically preventing black from doing a lot of things. But if you can imagine something like that and see the pattern, it's really worth trying to force it, trying to make it happen, even though I don't see an immediate way. And I'm just going to quickly show you one example. For example, we start with f4 because we also want to take away the e5 square. Black plays rook e7, we play rook to e1. d1, we're already making sure that we can protect our pawn as well, because if this pawn falls, everything collapses and we don't have our plan anymore. So we have to make sure that we are always keeping an eye on this pawn. We might get some trades, and all of a sudden it's becoming clear that we will have some variation, for example here after we push, where we can place our bishop on c6. And now it's suddenly very clear that white has a really good position. We have this bishop and pawn combo that we saw a long time ago. I mean, okay, black can take, we can do some trades, but in the end it's white who has the better position because we already have a bishop protected by the pawn. The bishop is also aiming at this square in the enemy camp. We have a rook on the 7th rank, and this endgame is always going to be better for white. So you can even use squares like this for your bishop. Now we are going to pay extra attention to our bishops, and we are going to cover a couple of very interesting concepts you can use in your own games as well. So the first thing we need to understand is that we have a thing that is called a pawn chain. I have more information on this in my pawn guide, my pawn structure guide. But here you can see that we have most of our pawns on the light squares. And that is something very important to always keep in mind. Whenever you push a pawn, you are always changing the pawn's color. Unless, of course, if you push it twice, but you know what I mean. Whenever we push a pawn, we always have to think about the fact that we are changing its color potentially. And here you can see that by the pawn pushes we have done, we have created a bunch of light squared pawns. What does that mean? Well, our light squared bishop is going to be pretty useless in these kinds of positions because it basically is stuck. It's stuck within all of these pawns and it can never go anywhere and it can never become active. The best thing would have been if in the opening we would have had the opportunity to put the bishop outside of the pawn chain or maybe trade it for the knight, because at least then it won't be hindered by all of our pawns. But it's okay, this opening is perfectly fine, but we have to of course pay attention to our bishop. So what can we do in a position like this? Well, we have to try and in a way break up the pawn chain, even if it's just a little bit, so that we can activate this bishop. So what are we going to do? Well, there are multiple plans, but the best option here is to play pawn takes c4. That's a forcing move as well. White has to respond to this. And then we play pawn to e5. And even though this might not seem like a drastic change in the structure, it actually is a very big change. Because all of a sudden, this diagonal has opened up. And at least our bishop will have some potential future on this diagonal. White can play something like h3 to try and prevent this. That's also something you can do. You can try and put the pawns on the same color as the enemy bishop that you want to hinder, because now, well, both this square and this square are no possibilities for us, but we still have some options and we can also put the bishop here. Why did white not capture this? Well, they can capture this, but they would be activating our knight. Also, this activates our dark squared bishop, plus we also have our light squared bishop, which is becoming more active. That's why white didn't take this. But even if white doesn't take us, we can still capture them, play something like knight b6, force the bishop to move, and now we can play bishop to f5. And while in the previous position, our light squared bishop seemed completely hopeless, no future, no plans, nothing we could do with it, all of a sudden we have these two bishops in very active positions, aiming up through the center at our opponent's queen side. Our knight has also improved and our queen has opened up. So it's very important, whatever position you have, to always think, what pieces can I improve? Maybe I should try to improve my rooks. We have already seen how we can do that with the open files. Maybe you should try to find an outpost for your knight. Or maybe one of your bishops is looking very pathetic and you want to improve it. And then you can do something like this to improve your bishop. The next concept I want to teach you is again about these pawns on a specific color. So this looks very similar, but let's just imagine in this position that we don't have our light squared bishop and this knight is also gone. So they were traded or whatever, it doesn't matter. So what is the plan then in this position? Because again, like, what do we have to do? Well, we are basically going to look, as always, at the difference in the position. What difference do we have? Well, one of the big differences is the fact that white has this light squared bishop and we have a dark squared bishop. Okay, so in this case, it's actually good for us if we have a bunch of pawns on the light squares, because that means those are all squares that we are potentially taking away. Plus, of course, pawns on light squares also attack light squares. So we are basically, all of these squares are no destination for the light squared bishop that white has. So we can try to limit it as much as possible. So what is a good move in this position? even something simple like a6. And you might be thinking, why? Well, at least if some changes occur, we can now choose how we want to recapture, because this pawn is also taking away this b5 square. And we definitely don't want to go for this line as we have before, playing something like this. This would be a big mistake, because while we are actually moving pawns away from the light squares, opening things up, suddenly this bishop is attacking our king. Like, we don't want this to happen in this line, so we are going to keep everything closed. And we are still going to keep everything closed. We are just going to play some improving moves. For example, improve the rooks, maybe improve the queen. At some point, white will probably capture, and this is what I said. Now we can take with the c pawn, and this a pawn is also doing its duty of making sure that this bishop cannot all of a sudden come in, pin this knight to the rook, or do some crazy things. Nope, the bishop can't do anything. Also, this knight is hindered by our pawn, so that's an extra benefit. So yeah, white can't really do anything with their bishop. They can maybe play a3, we can play b5. This also helps. Again, more pawns on the light squares, taking control of this. Let's say b4, actually not such a good move, but okay. We can play knight to b6, and you can suddenly see that the light squared bishop just can't do anything. And even though our starting position was so similar to the first one that we covered, our plan is completely different. So you always want to base your middle game plan based on your pieces and the differences between your pieces and your opponent's pieces as well. One more example here for the bishop is that even if you have a bishop, like we do have one here on g2, that has, you could say, quite a decent diagonal, the bishop is actually not so happy, because these two pawns here are quite annoying. They're basically limiting our bishop to this. This is the range of our bishop right now, because this square is an enemy control, and the same goes for all of those. Can you just imagine how good the bishop would be if those two pawns were not here? We would be reaching all the way into black's corner square. So if you realize something like that, as I have said many times, you just have to force these patterns to appear on your side of the board. So we are going to play pawn to b5. We don't care. It's actually a pawn sacrifice, and it's not so good if black takes this. If they don't take this, let's say they play any other move, we're actually going to play this, which is also not bad, of course. We are opening up a bunch of lines for attack, open file, knight is participating, suddenly things are getting better as well. But let's just say black takes this. Well, you can all of a sudden see our bishop is stronger, but still, it's not what we want. We still want to remove more pawns from this diagonal. So we can play something like c6, attack the pawn, attack the queen. Let's say the queen moves, we take this, the king has to move. And all of a sudden, we have an amazing bishop that's also aiming at this pawn, and we are going to be winning in a couple of moves. So if you see potential to improve the strength of one of your bishops by opening up diagonals, you should go for it, because instead of having this crippled bishop that was only looking at the two squares really, all of a sudden we have a real powerhouse sniper bishop looking at this enemy pawn, at this friendly pawn actually, and we have a rook participating as well. The knight can in some lines also participate, probably here from the a5 and then to this as well. So looking very, very nice. I also wanted to teach you about this concept of good bishop, bad bishop, which is sometimes you will often hear when you watch chess videos. So what does that mean exactly? Well, if we take a look at this for black, which of our bishops is the best bishop? Well, one of the things you can do is count your pawns. So in the center especially, we have a bunch of dark squared pawns. Here we have some light squared pawns, but that doesn't really matter because it's on our king side. The biggest problem we have here is these dark squared pawns, because they basically limit our bishop forever. And since this has already been pushed, our bishop is always stuck looking at its own pawn. While this one, even though it's not yet developed, is actually looking at a very long diagonal and maybe even supporting something going on g5. So our bad bishop here is this one, our good bishop is gonna be this one. Even though, as I said, it's not doing much right now, but maybe we can move it as well, and it's gonna have a lot of potential because of our pawns on the dark squares. For white, it's also easy. Look at all these pawns on the light squares in the center. This bishop is pretty trash because it can't do anything, and even here, these squares are controlled by black as well, so this is a pretty pathetic bishop. This is, well, you could say the best of the two bishops, but still not looking so great for white because, well, the bishop is still stuck, and even here, nothing is going on, but you could probably imagine maybe they could go here as well. So a really nice move in this position would actually be to play bishop to h6, which is something you might not think about if you just think about regular moves. Maybe you want to play d6, b6 I mean, or bishop d7. Bishop to h6 makes a lot of sense. Why? Well, we are just gonna trade our bad bishop for whatever we can. If it's a knight, that's fine. If it's a bishop, that's also fine. Let's say white moves, we are just gonna trade. And all of a sudden, we have a really good bishop, and white can't really do much with this bishop. So that was just the entire plan. We were exchanging our bad bishop for our opponent's good bishop, or if they didn't allow it, at least our bishop would have been more active on this diagonal, or we could have exchanged it for a knight in some lines as well, even though we were never really forced to do that. Let's say white just makes any move. Of course, you don't have to take this immediately. You can just chill for a little bit, improve your bishop, and just wait and see what white is going to do as well. But here we are just going to trade bishops, and after some remaneuvering that can be done, all of a sudden you can see that black has a really good knight, but still we want to improve this bishop a little bit more. So you can play something like pawn to f5, because of course if they take you, we are activating this here, and if they don't take, we are going to start some kind of pawn attack on the enemy king, which is also very great. So that is how you can think about this concept of good bishop, bad bishop, determine which one is the good bishop or bad bishop for you and for your opponent, and also go for trades that are in your advantage. And still in this position, we are doing a way better job than white with our pieces. Now we are going to take a look at a bunch of positions which are going to be bishop versus knight. And bishop versus knight is a really common theme, because a lot of the times when you're playing chess, all of a sudden you are going to have a bishop versus a knight, or a knight versus bishop, or two bishops versus knight and bishop, all those kinds of things, and different types of positions. So you need to have some general plan inside of your mind of what am I going to do in all of those positions based on my pieces. So first we are going to cover bishop versus knight. So this one I think is pretty easy to remember, because we have a bishop, black has a knight, and we are in an open position. Open position basically means the center is not blocked. There are no pawns here. Everything is open. You can see our bishop is already really strong because of this open position. If you imagine a bunch of pawns here being blocked up, well, the bishop wouldn't be that happy. So in this position, the bishop is a far superior piece. And even though the material is pretty much equal, if you count it up, white is actually winning. So if you have this, all you want to do basically is attack. We want to attack, and we want to try to force something. For example, rook 81, we attack the queen, bishop to f5, queen to f5, I mean, of course. We are attacking this pawn, and black has to defend it. Maybe they try to defend it in a flexible way, because of course playing b6 doesn't look too great. You can already see this bishop is becoming even stronger. So let's say black plays this. But you can already see how this is pretty problematic for black, because white always has this really strong bishop. Of course, we are never going to trade it for the knight, but we are going to try to make it as powerful as we potentially can. And black can't afford to play moves like this. And even if they move the knight, our bishop is still a monster. And usually the knight will also have a really tough time to find a good square where it can land and stay for a while. Like, it has to move now, we can attack it, it has to move again, it's trying to attack our pawn, it doesn't really matter, we don't even care about the pawn, we are going to start some kind of counter attack here with the rook, attack the queen has to move, and we can use our bishop. And all of a sudden you can see, in just a couple of moves, bam, we have three pieces here attacking, and also this knight is under attack, and it's not so clear what black is going to have to do to try and solve this. Black can also even do some kind of counter attack here. They can do a fork with the knight on the queen and the rook, but it's actually not going to work, because of bishop takes f7. We are going to sacrifice the bishop, create open lines. Of course, taking this is very problematic. This is going to be a simple checkmate in two. So yeah, the king has to move. We can move the queen, and you might get something like this. The exact pattern doesn't matter too much, but in the end here you can see we are going to be able to force a checkmate. We can even sacrifice our queen and go for a checkmate like this. So all of that was basically already possible from our starting position. All we had to do was attack. We have to keep attacking, and at some point something is going to collapse. And here we can just sacrifice, go all in, and then we have a really nice sequence, and now we have this checkmate. So here we now have a position where white has 2 bishops and black has 2 knights. And again, this is an open position because we don't have any pawns in the center. So who has the better pieces here? Of course, it's going to be white. If one bishop is good in open positions, 2 bishops are even better. Especially because 2 bishops together, that's known as the bishop pair, they work together as a pair because one of them can control the dark squares while the other controls the light squares. So this is incredible for attacking opportunities. And we are just going to play through the game again. So again, queen f5, really good starting move because we are attacking the c5 pawn. And immediately this, well, would be an instant loss for black. So they can't do this. They have to try and defend with the queen. And we can play bishop to g5. And here you can see that if you have 2 bishops, or even with 1 bishop sometimes, yes, you can exchange against a knight, but you are only going to exchange if you know that you are going to get some clear benefit from it that might win you the game. So if I just make a random move for black, for example, pawn to a6, bam, we can take this, and all of a sudden we have a winning position. This is opened up, but even here, maybe I even want to go for the checkmate because we were able to eliminate this knight that was an important defender. So that is how we can do this. But of course, black can also try to do some counterattack, maybe attack our queen, and some maneuvering might be done. But you are going to notice that if you have the 2 bishops, as long as you keep attacking, you're always going to win. The position from your opponent is going to break at some point. Because even if they try to hold on and to defend and to make sure they don't lose any pawns, you can just attack their rooks, for example, with your bishops. Do some trades, and here after the trades, the queens are gone, we have an extra pawn, we still have the bishop pair, and just look at this. All of these squares are still in our control. Even this square, the enemy rook can't enter the positions. And the knight almost can't find any good moves. The only thing black can really try to do is create this kind of lock with the 2 knights where where they are actually both protecting each other and create some kind of stable position like this. But it's never going to last really long. We can keep attacking and we can build up all of our pieces. And as I said, in some line, we might want to exchange if we want. We don't always have to. Here we can even play for tricks because, well, if they take this, that's a checkmate. If they don't, we can win this pawn. Otherwise, we win this. So yeah, let's say they exchange, they do this. It doesn't really matter. The 2 bishops are always going to dominate. They're always going to be the better option to have. So in open positions, this is how you can use the 2 bishops. And this is already completely winning for white. Now again, we have an open position, pretty much the same thing, but the difference is I added in a knight for white and I also added in a bishop for black. So what's the difference? Is this better or worse? This is actually a little bit worse for white than our previous one where we had the 2 bishops. Why? Well, since black also has a bishop, this benefit that we have is less clear because our light squared bishop has a counterpart on the black side. That can prevent us from doing things. So our only real benefit here is the fact that we have a dark squared bishop versus one of those knights. What we want to try and do, of course, is if we can, we want to trade this bishop with our knight. Then we just simply have the position we have seen before with 2 bishops, which is immediately winning. So yeah, if I play something like rook e8, we take this, they take this. This is immediately winning for white. We have already seen this. The 2 bishops are going to be superior. So black has to try and really make sure that this bishop cannot be traded. And as white here, what we would like to do is to keep forcing this. We want to keep attacking as well. First of all, we want to keep attacking because we do have the 2 bishops. And second of all, in some line, we might be able to force something. So here we have multiple things. We actually have a threat here. We have a threat on c5. We can sometimes do something with the knight and also open up this bishop. So a bit complicated to analyze in big detail here. But the thing is, the black position will eventually collapse. Our 2 bishops are still going to be superior. Defending is always going to be hard. And we can play a bunch of moves. I'm just going to play a bunch of moves. But in the end, we are going to always keep threatening to trade the bishop. Here, black decides, okay, I'm going to eliminate one of the knights with my own knight. But it doesn't really matter. We still have the 2 bishops versus a bishop and a knight. So still, white has the better position. And this is really tough to defend from the black side. We can play a couple of more moves. Of course, Here, we don't want to do something like this. Suddenly, we would be giving away our advantage that we have. That is these two bishops. So if they attack us, we just want to move back one of our bishops. We can just continue play. We can just play some more moves. And in the end, you can see white is always going to keep winning material, keep making progress. And these two bishops are really unstoppable. Next is a closed center. So this is what a closed center could look like. This is not extremely closed. Well, I mean, we have the pawns here, but it could be a little bit worse if we also had locked pawns here or sometimes even on the f-file as well. But this is already quite closed, quite locked, because you can see that this bishop, not really happy, can't really do much. Looking at this pawn, looking at a brick basically. So what does this position mean? Well, here it's knight versus bishop. What is the better piece? Of course, it's gonna be our knight. Why? Well, first of all, it's placed in the center, protected by a pawn, and already aiming at all of these squares in the enemy camp. But the same thing, these pawns don't really bother the knight. The knight can jump over pawns, always keep making threats, even if the center is closed. So here the bishop is actually the slacker piece, the worst piece of the two. So yeah, black might try to use it, for example here, using it on this diagonal, but it doesn't really matter. We are just going to keep attacking, and this bishop is never really going to do anything. The fact that our pawns are also on light squares here is really good, because that means that the other pawns from our opponent are going to be on the dark square. So their own pawns are blocking their bishop, which means they can't even attack our pawns with their bishop. And here I'm not going to show in big detail this variation because it's not so important. But again, we want to attack on the side where we can use our knight, and that is here on the queen side. We can attack here. Also, we might at some point try to play for tricks here with the check or with this check as well. So again, we want to attack, but we want to keep the center closed. A terrible move in this position would be something like this, and just opening up things. Because of course, the more we open up, the better the bishop is also going to be. For example, now bishop g7. And yeah, suddenly they just have a good bishop as well. So we want to keep the center closed and attack on other sides of the board. And we can even play moves like this. Because again, if we can place our pawns here on these squares, we can take away squares from the bishop. And you can see that these squares are already taken away. Maybe we can even play h4 and also take away this square and really make sure that this bishop can't do anything. So let's say they play this, we can play h4, the bishop can go back, but now we are also controlling these squares, this with the knight, this with the knight, so this bishop actually doesn't have that much to do. You might think, well, they are attacking a rook, but it's only a temporary threat after we move the rook. It's pretty clear that this bishop can't go anywhere. It actually can't move, just can't move. Wherever it moves, it's gonna be lost. And also, it's blocking the connection between the queen and the rook, which means that it's going to be harder to defend for black as well. So we can play a bunch more moves, but in the end, we are going to have a big advantage on the queen side here, because we're always going to be the one with more pieces on the queen side, because black simply has really bad connection with the pieces. And whatever happens, we can keep going, but eventually here we can even trap the queen, or if we don't trap the queen, maybe we're going to win, the entire center is going to collapse, and of course, we can take these pawns. It will open up the position a little bit, which will make the bishop stronger, but at the same time, if we are up a pawn or two, it doesn't matter anymore that this bishop becomes a little bit more active. Now, we have again a closed center, and we have a knight pair versus a bishop pair. So is this better or worse for white? Well, it's actually a little bit worse. You might think that's strange. I mean, if one bishop is good, two bishops is better. So if one knight is good, why is two knights not better? Well, the thing is, first of all, we only have one good outpost square here, which was this square, and we have a knight there. But that means that this knight, yeah, not really doing much. And okay, this bishop, it's still trash. That's still the same. But now they have this bishop, and this bishop can be a little bit annoying. For example, they play bishop c6, and all of the plans and the patterns that we have just seen here on the queen side, none of them are possible, because we just can't enter the position like this. So yeah, that's just how it goes. They can block the rook, and we can't really do much. Okay, I mean, we can try to start an attack. They can try to block it with a6. We can try this. They can again try to pin this knight. It's all, yeah. I'm not going to say complicated, but in some line we're going to get this. And you might think, did black make a mistake? Because now it's knight versus bishop. But this light squared bishop is pretty good controlling this. If the knight ever jumps forward again, it's just going to trade against the knight and double our pawns. The other thing I wanted to say in this position is the worst thing that they could possibly do, of course, is take this. Because all of a sudden this is identical to what we have already seen. Black has a pretty trash bishop and we have an amazing knight. So you have to keep this in mind as the defender as well. If the center is closed and it's 2 knights versus 2 bishops, it's still fine, you will be able to defend it. But you don't want to create this kind of situation where you do have a bad bishop versus a really strong knight. Now again we have a closed center, but now we have a knight pair and a bishop against a bishop pair and a knight. So it should be clear to you that for white this is actually even worse. And this position is even black who is a little bit better. Because okay, we have one good knight, we have one good piece. But this knight is not really doing much, this bishop is also not really doing much. And black also has a really strong knight here. Because usually in those closed positions, that means your knights are going to be good, but your opponent's knights are also going to be good. And these 2 bishops are actually a little bit better than the bishop and the knight from our side. So we might try to trade it. They can even trade because, of course, after this trade, we already know that bishop and knight versus bishop and bishop, it's pretty decent for black. And this is actually defendable with the same idea we have already seen here, the bishop to c6. What I now want to show you is that, again, we have 2 knights versus 2 bishops, but you can see that this is a way different position. Because first of all, it's way more closed than what we had before, because the center is closed on 3 files. Also this looks pretty close. Plus, we also have 2 knights which are extremely well placed, controlling all squares in the enemy camp, even attacking the rook. And the opponent has a bishop that is not doing anything. So who is better here? Of course, this is one of those rare cases where it's going to be the player with the knights that's really doing extremely well, even though our opponent has 2 bishops. Black, of course, has to move, and we can just keep making improvements. And what we want to do, of course, is to try and keep this position closed. I mean, black can exchange rooks, they can exchange queens, it doesn't matter. They might even, in some lines, be able to exchange a knight. But you know what the funny thing actually is in this position? Do you know what the best move is? The best move is actually rook takes f8. Which seems crazy. We give away a rook for a bishop. But the thing is, first of all, we get this fork. But the second thing is, this knight is so strong, it's actually worth more than our rook. So if we can keep it here by sacrificing, then that is just what we have to do. Of course, we can also allow black to take this, but there are tricks in every single line here because we can take this as well. And this is one of those rare cases where knights are better. But I don't think you will get this a lot. Maybe if you like closed positions and you close a lot of pawns, you push a lot of pawns like this, you might get this a little bit more. But in general, you're not going to see this that often. Here, of course, we have pretty similar position. 2 knights, but we also have a bishop, which means our opponent also has a knight. And then the same rule applies. Since black also has a knight, it's a little bit less strong for white. It's still good, but it's a little bit less strong. Because, for example, here, black can just take our knight. I know, we can take this rook, but it's not even the best move. Let's just say we take this, they move the rook, and suddenly one of our key pieces has been removed. This bishop is trash, our bishop is also trash. And this knight, okay, it's a decent piece, but it's also not really doing much. The knight in the center was better. And then the final thing I want to talk about is creating weak squares by moving your pawns. And that is one thing we haven't talked about yet, but that's also important. So we are now going to try to really combine everything we have seen in this one final position. So, what do I see? The first thing I see is we have a completely open file. This is completely open. No pawns on this one. So white has the rook on the file, which means white's rook is better placed because our rooks are a little bit passive. But I also don't see a big problem because, well, we can just immediately challenge this. And if we get some trade, that's even better for us. And if white is this, of course, we can trade. And why is this so good? Well, we have a closed position. We should realize this is a closed position. And in a closed position, I already told you, the knights are better. And also, white just has too many pawns on his own color. Also, we have some pawns taking away squares as well. So this would be an easy winnable endgame for black. So if you think about, I'm going to play rook to c8, that's fine. That means you understood the lesson on open files. You also understood the lesson on closed centers, and you also understood that knights are better than bishops in these kinds of positions. But there are other things we can do, and you don't have to rush into things. An incredible move here is the move pawn to h5, because this also combines a lot of things we have seen. Because, well, if white takes this, that's just devastating, because the rook is going to take, and now we have what is known as the semi-open file. But this one is a bit more interesting, because we still have some targets for attack. Plus, this also creates the outpost square for our knight, as we have talked about, and our knight is going to become even stronger here. Of course, white can also push, but it doesn't really matter, because now our knight is all of a sudden becoming alive. It's on this outpost square, all of these pawns are on the dark square, so this bishop is pretty bad. This is under attack, so white has to protect this. And now my big question, are you going to take this bishop with your knight, yes or no? And I hope that by now you realize the answer is of course no. Because if we take this, it's immediately a draw. Why? Well, it's just a position with two rooks and the same amount of pawns. Nothing is going to happen here. But in this position, we have an incredible knight versus a very passive bishop. So make sure you never give away a good knight like this. And when you are winning with a bishop in an open position, never trade your bishop for the knight. Unless, if of course, I can do this and I can win 2 pawns or create a promotion or something, fine. But just trading it with no reason, nope, we are not going to do that. So what is the next plan? Of course, we are going to take the open file, as we have already talked about. White can try to challenge us. We don't care. We just trade. If they take with the rook, they are losing this pawn, and we can just remaneuver back, and we also have a potential to create a queen. If they take with the bishop, what are we going to play? Of course, rook here, taking up the open file. Even if this bishop moves, we are going to come in with a check, and we are going to start grabbing these pawns and promote. So this position really was the ultimate example of what you need to do, because we have open files, semi-open files, weak pawns. We also have the outpost square for our knight, so this really combines everything. And if you are playing chess and in your next game, and you really think about this, everything we have talked about, you will be able to find the best plan. One more thing I want to say before I end this video is that you should definitely check out my video on pawn structures. Pawn structures are one of the most important things for middle games. I won't cover it in this video because I already have a very good video. I think it's almost 15 minutes of pawn structures. So you definitely have to go and watch it. You can type in Pegasus Chess pawn structures or just check my pinned comment. You will also find the link there to that video. That's it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.